My name is Eliza, and I'm the Communications Coordinator at OCIC, the Ontario Council for International Cooperation. So before I begin to talk about what Money Talks is and introduce our speakers today, I want to remind everyone that this webinar is recorded, both audio and video recorded. So if you don't want to have your webcam on, you're more than welcome to turn it off. And also we recommend that all participants, please turn off your, please mute yourself while another person is talking. And that also apply to both speakers because we have two speakers today. So when one speaker is talking, the other speaker and I will be muting ourselves because the Zoom do pick up which screen is actually talking. So that would be better. And in the first 30 minutes, we will have around 6 questions prepared for our two speakers today. So that gives us a good 3 to 4 minutes per question. And in the last 20 to 30 minutes, we will have an audience Q&A. So to avoid the chaos of everyone talking at the same time into the mic, I would recommend people to actually put your question in the chat box. So if this is your first time using Zoom, you can put your mouse at the bottom of your screen. There should be several different options, and there is one that says chat on your right-hand side. If you open it, you can type a message, but everyone will be able to see it. So what I suggest is when you have a question, maybe type it up somewhere and only paste it into the chat box when I open the floor and say this is the time when you can pose your question. Okay, so a little bit of introduction to OCIC for those who do not know. The Ontario Council for International Cooperation, OCIC, is an expanding network community of Ontario-based organizations, institutions, and individuals working towards social justice, human rights, and sustainable development goals. And Money Talks, what we have today here, is actually our online publication. This is the 4th issue of this online publication produced by OCIC. And it's really to discuss common funding challenges and solutions in the nonprofit and charity sector. And it is a capacity building tool and resource for those who are seeking to learn more about funding strategies or to diversify their funding options. So this particular issue, the issue 4, we are focusing on foundations. And that's why we have Canadian Women's Foundation with us today to talk about their funding cycles, some grant-seeking best practices, and so on and so forth. So this is the second webinar actually for this issue. For those who are interested in viewing and reading more about the other foundations, you can go onto our website. That is ocic.on.ca/moneytalks. It's all small case, not capital. So without further ado, I want to introduce our two speakers today. So we have Anuradha Dugal. Maybe Anu, maybe you can unmute yourself and give us a wave so we can see where you are. Yes. And so Anu is the Director of Community Initiatives at Canadian Women's Foundation since 2008. She's currently responsible for national strategies related to violence against women and girls, including trafficking. And she sits on Minister Monsef's Advisory Council for the federal government strategy on gender-based violence. And for our second speaker, we have Beth Malcolm. Hello, Beth. So Beth is VP of Community Initiatives from the Canadian Women's Foundation. And today, both of our speakers will be answering the first 6 questions that I prepared. And for the Q&A section in the later half of this webinar, it will be Beth leading and answering the questions because unfortunately, Anu has to leave for another meeting at 1:30. So I think we will get started. Does anyone have any questions before we start? No, it's all good. All right. So for the first question, maybe before a question, maybe Beth and Anu, you can just tell us really briefly about Canadian Women's Foundation.
Sure. Thanks, Eliza. Thanks, obviously, to the Ontario Council for International Cooperation for inviting us here today. It's been very interesting to learn about all of the work that your organization and so many of your members are doing. We're very excited to be able to provide a little bit of capacity building help in this way about grant making and how to write and present your fantastic work to foundations like Canadian Women's Foundation. We've been around for 30 years. We grant only in Canada. Our areas of focus are violence prevention, economic development or economic security for women, and girls and women's leadership. And we've been, our main work is to raise money and give it out to organizations. We also do capacity building with the organizations that we fund and others. We do research and evaluation to support the work that we do and support the sector generally, some policy work. We do a lot of public education through our different campaigns around what is violence against women or what it means to be a girl in Canada right now. And we do a lot of work with other national women's organizations around issues such as Up for Debate, around political leadership, or, for example, the Pay Equity Coalition of Canada.
Thank you. And then I'll move on to our first question, which is, what does a grant cycle typically look like in Canadian Women's Foundation?
So I don't mind taking that question. It depends which cycle you're talking about. So I've mentioned that we already have three areas of expertise, and they also have we have different cycles that some are multi-year, which means they start at the beginning of a 5-year process and finish at the end of a 5-year process. We have one annual grants process. So rather than try and give you months and years and when things start and when things finish, I'm just going to give you an overview of how we generally make decisions, because I think that's the easiest way for people to understand our processes. So we start off with a call for proposals, an RFP, which is sent out to all the organizations on our database. It's also on our website. It's also sent out through social media. And we send that out with our criteria of what we're looking for. And all of our grants processes now are require an online proposal. So we have a platform, a portal that you have to connect to, and then you use those, you follow the questions in the online process, and you respond to them as you go through. There's lots of support. I know that for some organizations who aren't used to doing that, that can be daunting the first time. We offer lots of support and advice and information on how to do it best so that you don't lose work, you don't end up closing something down and finding out that you haven't saved it. There's lots of support on how to do that. Once you've put in your application online with the foundation, it then goes through a 2 or 3 level review process. So the first review process is to check that it fits in the criteria broadly, that you are a charitable organization. We can only give money to organizations with a charitable status with a CRA number. And to make sure that you fit broadly in what the call for proposals was referring to, and that your application is complete. So that's the first level, and sometimes around 10% of proposals don't make it through that first reading, 5 to 10% depending. Then the next cycle is a shortlisting process, whereby we shortlist to the grants that are best aligned with our criteria. And then after that, we move to a committee process where we ask community experts, other grantees, academics, sometimes donors, some of our also participants from programs could all come together, and together they review what we consider the strongest proposals with the best fit with our criteria, and then they make a final selection to the ones that will go ahead for funding. And the funding process requires an agreement which we sign, and then disbursements of funds through various different timelines, depending on what sort of funding you're getting.
Amazing. And so based on this question, we want to jump to our next question, which is very important. When you talk about there are this 5 and 10% that didn't even go to the second round, and in each round you narrow it down and see which fits the criteria better. So our question is, what are some red flags or highlights that you actually look for in a grant proposal?
So I can be honest, one of the first things that we look for is whether the budget balances, because it's very important for us to see that the expenses and the revenues will match, so that we know that the funds you're asking for will actually fulfill the outcomes you're planning. If those numbers don't match, then we're pretty concerned that you won't be in a strong financial position, or you won't be managing the funds in a way that is rigorous enough. That would be an important thing that we would look for. Another red flag is if there's missing information. So if there's questions not answered, if the questions are answered with single words or very simplistically, if there seems to be, let's say you've planned for partnerships and yet there's no list of who the partners are. If you have, particularly if you're working with schools, school boards, or young people, knowing how you're going to recruit young people if you're not a youth organization is extremely important, because that can often end up delaying a program for months if you're not ready with the young people sort of ready to start right away. We've already experienced that several times with many of the grants we've given out. So we know that if that's not strong in the proposal, we will not have a program that starts on time with the expected numbers that you're planning for. And then for the Canadian Women's Foundation specifically, we always have a question in our proposal that says, please explain the gender analysis of the program that you're offering. And that is a question that can be answered extremely well, and sometimes it can be answered with a lot of holes in it or a lot of question marks on our end. So I would, if you are going to make an application, sure what gender analysis is, I would take some time to think about that, and maybe even have a community expert, somebody a women's group that you work with, or an organization that knows that part of it. There are resources online, there are training sessions online about what the gender-based analysis is that you can resource. Usually just a Google search will lead that to you. So those are 2 or 3 of the main flags on us.
Beth, would you like to add anything if you come up with any other ideas?
No, I think that those are the primary ones that, and I think we'll get into some of the other things that you can do in a positive way in the future, in the next questions.
Awesome. So our next question is very relevant. It is about how can applicants effectively tell their stories, as we see that there seems to be a really diverse pool of applicant and diverse proposals that your foundation has received. So how can they effectively tell the stories in a proposal, and what are some creative ways, whether it's in telling the story or in impact measurement, that you have seen in the past?
So I'm going to take on some of these questions, and Annie will jump in as we go along. But I want to just say that in terms of effectively telling your story, if you take a lot of what Annie was just talking about and really think about that and think about it in a positive way, it's really, really important. We can't even stress enough that you take the time to answer the questions clearly, and getting somebody else to review it who doesn't know anything about the program is an excellent idea, because you know your program, you live with it every day, so you make assumptions oftentimes about what you're saying, and sometimes it doesn't come through as clearly to people who know nothing about the program or the organization. So having somebody else read it, I know that adds an extra time to your proposal writing, but it's really valuable because we as funders don't necessarily know anything about your organization or your program, so we can't fill in the gaps. So having somebody else read it is a way to avoid a lot of those red flags that Anna was talking about earlier. And so I would say that the other important thing to think about in terms of effectively filling out the proposals and the applications is to understand what we're looking for in the proposals, to really take some time to look at the criteria and review them and make sure you understand what Canadian Women's Foundation is looking for so that you can make sure that it's a good fit before you spend a lot of time on the proposal. But in terms of effectively telling your story, I think it's important that you reflect on what you're trying to achieve in your program and how some of the positive things that have already happened, you can illustrate that in a really positive way. Sometimes you might make assumptions about what you think we would know or what we would think would be happening in a program. So really taking the time to think about what have been some of our positive experiences so far, and then highlighting them right up front in the proposal. In terms of creative ways to demonstrate what's happening, we're always happy if people want to include letters or pictures, some photos. Obviously, photos would need to have consent from the people in the photo to be included in the proposal. That's always really positive. And then sometimes it's a matter of taking what you've learned in your evaluation from your programs and putting them in, because oftentimes it can take a long time to read full evaluation reports. But if you take out some of the highlights or demonstrate them in a chart or an infographic or some kind of timeline, that can be really helpful in a quick read, because as you can imagine, we're often looking at over 100 applications for one grant stream. So if you can think about how you can illustrate what you've learned from your evaluation in a one-page summary, either visual or written, that's really helpful for us. Yeah, I would say in highlighting what's been the most significant change for participants as a result of your program, highlighting that in some way. And we know that sometimes these are new programs, so you don't necessarily have evaluation results. So you can look at some of your other programs that might have had similar populations or similar objectives and illustrating what happened in that particular program.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And I think our next question kind of falls into the same way of how do you measure impact, but how do you actually be accountable to your impact, whether it's a positive impact or a potentially harmful impact there could be. So our next question is actually how does the CWF ensure that no power is abused in program working particularly with vulnerable groups, and what are the accountability and transparency mandates for the projects that you fund?
Well, in all of our application processes, we ask for an anti-racism, anti-oppression policy of the organization. Some organizations might have a different name for it, but essentially it's an anti-racist, anti-oppression policy that we're looking for, and we would review that. And if an organization doesn't have that, we would want them to explain why they haven't. Sometimes it's because it's in process and they haven't finished it yet. But we would want them to explain why they haven't finished it if they haven't. So we really think that that's an important element of ensuring that vulnerable groups are respected, and that there's processes if there is any challenges in an organization, or if people are feeling that they want to put in a complaint about something, that if they have those policies in place, then there's protections and there's mechanisms for reporting. We also ask the question in our applications around equity. and gender equity. And so we're really looking at how people are responding to, like, how they think about gender equity. And that often gives us clues into how they would be working with vulnerable populations. We ask another question about, and we have an expectation that all of our the programs that we're funding involve participants in developing the program, having input in what the program looks like. So to us, that tells us a little bit that they're hearing from people, and we would hope that if you're listening to participants or clients, whichever you may call it, that they would be thinking about ways that they can ensure that there is no abuse of those people, of anyone. So we're looking for clues in those kinds of questions. And if an organization says that they don't involve participants in the development of a program or ideas of ways of working, then that would be a red flag for us. In our multi-year grants, we also do site visits. If you're in the shortlisted group, so towards the end, as Anna was describing it, we go through a series of shortlisting processes. So if you're near the end of the process, we would do a site visit. And so we would ask questions there around those kinds of issues. And we're there to make sure that an organization can deliver what they say on paper they can deliver. So we're talking to board, we're talking to staff. Oftentimes people will include participants as well, or clients. So we get a sense then about the mechanisms that are in place to ensure all people are heard and respected. And then if there are challenges, if an organization is funded, and that we sometimes will hear from past participants or current participants, sometimes they'll phone the funder, or it could be a former staff person. We would follow up with that and have a conversation with the organization. And in certain circumstances, we would do a site visit to determine, whether the allegations against the organization are true or not. Generally, we tend to hear from community members when things are not going well. Sometimes you don't hear when things are going well, but we always hear when things aren't going well.
And maybe I can just add that one of the things about having that conversation with the participants, or with people who flag issues for us, is that we also want to keep it very much between us and the organization. That we want to hear directly from those organizations what their side of the story is too, and we wouldn't go in making any assumptions, and we would also want to be respect everybody's privacy in that. That's also an important factor in working with vulnerable folks of any kind.
Yes, I think that is a very sorry, Beth, you want to add something?
No, that's okay. I was just taking my phone off mute.
Yeah, I think that is a very important conversation that we have to have, and we really have to think through before we really push out a program of how much accountability and transparency that that is really required before we actually engage with the community. So, because I'm a little bit concerned about time, and I know Anu, you have to go.
Is it all right if I just step out now between the two questions, and then I won't interrupt you in the middle of a...
Sure. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and
thank you.
We really hope to hear from you soon and have more collaboration in the future.
Same on our side too. Thank you so much. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
All right, then I will jump to the next question we have with Beth. Next question is, what was the past partnership that Canadian Women's Foundation have that really stood out to you?
Okay, just to clarify, are you thinking about an organization that we may have funded in the past and how things developed in that funding relationship? Is that what you're looking for?
It could be that, or it could be we actually would love to explore if you have any other partnership experience, not necessarily a grantor-grantee relationship.
Okay, so then I'll start with the other kinds of partnerships besides the grantor-grantee type of relationship. So at the foundation, we have been doing a lot of thinking and, well, been doing a lot of work, and then more recently trying to think a little bit differently about systemic change and how do we really change. It's not just about funding a violence prevention program, but how do we really get to the roots of some of the issues? So we have been fortunate that we are currently involved in 6 different SSHRC grants, and SSHRC grants are Social Science and Humanities Research Council grants. They're generally with universities, and they're often 7-year-long research grants that the university is leading, and then they bring in community partners. So we're community partners in a lot of different grants, and one of them, well, there's some are like with McGill's, University of Ottawa, Ryerson University, and we really think that this is an important role that we can play in terms of bringing what we've learned from organizations that we've funded over the years into this kind of conversation. So it's not just our voice, but we're trying to bring forward what we've learned from funded organizations working on the ground, like lots of you folks. So one, for example, is a research grant that's happening at McGill University around looking at sexual violence on campus. And we're really trying to, along with other community partners, we're not the only community partner, but really trying to look at how do you get universities to be more accountable for developing policies on campus, make sure that reporting is safe and that people know their rights and know where to report. So over the course of the years, lots of universities now are really looking at what do their policies look like and how do they make change in their policies on campus. Another example is one that we have at University of Ottawa, that we're one of the community partners looking at the impact of online engagement of youth and the issues around data collection that corporations are doing and privacy, and because there's a lot of online challenges, we might say, lots of positive, of course, but lots of challenges online. So we're trying to help look at, for youth, how do we make it a safe space, and how do youth begin to understand their privacy rights online? And one of the interesting things is that what this research is telling us is that kids are actually, of course, leaving lots, everybody does, but there's lots of data being collected. And what happens is youth are seeing advertisements and there's, pops up, read this, based on what they've looked at before. So it's reinforcing negative stereotypes sometimes. So if a youth looks at something, an issue area, they're going to keep getting the same kinds of information. So they keep reading what they already know, and they don't have any challenge, differing viewpoints that might be presented. So if it's a youth who's looking at some really, let's just say, like really discriminatory, racist stuff, they're going to keep seeing the same things over again. They're not going to see something that opposes that viewpoint. And so it can end up reinforcing negative stereotypes. So that's one thing that we're really excited about working on. How do we get youth to understand what they're seeing and broaden their view to not reinforce the negative stereotypes? So there's so many partnerships that we're involved in, and there's lots of exciting ones. But in terms of grantee funder-fundee relationships, we've really, because we have multi-year grants with organizations, we really see a strong relationship. We try and really support them where we can. And sometimes when our funding comes to an end, we do what we can to help them find other funding. And there's many organizations that, will write a letter of support, or we'll help them. We'll sometimes go to a meeting with a potential new funder to talk about the positive things that have happened in that 4 years or 5 years of funding. So we do want to support organizations to carry on the good work that they're doing even after our funding might come to an end.
Thank you, Beth. That's really interesting. I never thought about the data privacy and how to not reinforce the stereotype that you're seeing online. That really inspired me, and it's really something new that I think today's work towards sustainable development, towards gender equality and social justice should look into, because we don't just live a single life in the offline world.
Yeah.
So my last question for you will be, since I think a lot of our audience and a lot of members for OCIC are small and medium-sized organizations. So how can SMOs, small and medium-sized organizations, reach out to the foundation, and how can we engage with our civic leaders to push for more gender equality actions and policies?
Well, I think that, while we were talking about the negative parts of social media, there are some positive things. We can communicate in a better way than we have ever before, I think. So, I think even small things like tweeting and then retweeting each other's and the foundations and other things that you agree with, to make sure that that those messages are being circulated. We tweet a lot, so continuing to share those messages with key people. We also have just recently got some petition software, so that means that we can send out letters to people and let them know that you can sign this letter. For example, there was the recent one was around ending sex discrimination in the Indian Act, because there's a lot of language in the Indian Act that discriminates against women. So there was a petition letter that we helped promote and circulate around signing on to that. And so organizations can sign up for like our e-newsletter and then find out when these petitions or these letters are available. Or if you have ones of your own that you've created, share them with us and we can try and amplify the messages that you folks want to give out as well. So we also have some position papers that we've started putting on our website, and people are welcome to go there and look on, it's under sector resources. There's policy briefs. So there's a brief there around housing, and people are welcome to, look at it, share it, and even modify it for their own position paper that they'd like to write. And so organizations coming together to be more than one voice in raising a concern about an issue is always really helpful. So whether that be just in your local community or connecting with larger national organizations like Canadian Women's Foundation, sharing those things on social media is always really helpful.
Wonderful. And I think for those who are very interested in different ways of partnership that Canadian Women's Foundation have engaged in, I really recommend to read through our previous interview with Anu, the other speaker we had. And there is a long answer from Anu specifically talking about, even if you're not applying or not eligible to apply for a CWF grant, what are different ways that you can really engage in a dialogue or engage in a movement with the foundation? So I think this is the time where we open the floor to our audience. If you have any question, please don't just unmute yourself. We don't want everyone talking at the same time. Please paste your question into the chat box. You can find a chat box in the menu in the bottom of your screen. Maybe while people are typing, Beth, I actually have a question for you.
Sure.
So how does Canadian Women Foundation sustain long-term relationship with its grantees? Like, say I know the fund might end after 2 years, but do you try to really maintain a more long-term relationship with a grantee that you had before?
So we always like to have long-term relationships. We probably fund about 100 different organizations every year, so it's sometimes hard to maintain relationships. But we have lots of organizations that we fund that we that will reach out to us a year or two later and say, would you write a letter of support for us, or we're working on this initiative, would you share it out for us? And we're always happy to do that. We have a monthly grantee newsletter that anybody that's been funded now, it's in the last 4 years, receives this, which is you know, as things come across our desk about a conference or about a new research paper or whatever, we would send that out to them. So we do try and stay in touch monthly by that e-newsletter for anybody that we funded in the past, and we'll just keep adding more organizations to that as we fund new ones. So we're a small group, so it's hard to stay in touch with everybody, but when people when we can support, we're happy to, and we're also happy to let people know what we're doing. So if they would like to support, they can.
Fantastic. And we have one audience question during the meantime from Jessica. Jessica, I'm just going to read out what you typed. Jessica says, is preference usually given to local or grassroots community organizations, or would larger organizations, for example, NGOs that works both domestically and abroad, still be considered so long as the program is delivered in Canada?
Yeah, so that's a key point in your question, that we do only fund in Canada at the Canadian Women's Foundation. We're not, that's our mandate, just is within Canada. So organization has to be based in Canada, and the program has to be based in Canada. If it's a large organization that works both in Canada and somewhere else, that's okay as long as the program is delivered in Canada. However, that being said, we do tend to give priority to smaller organizations who have less access to resources and perhaps maybe can't fundraise as easily as larger organizations. So we don't say we would never fund a large organization, but we tend to fund more smaller organizations.
Yeah, Jessica, is that good? Does that answer the question? Yeah, perfect. And we have another question from Catherine. She says, what are the most compelling way you see organizations demonstrating the need for support?
I would say that the most compelling ways, first of all, sometimes people will start writing their proposal, and the question about, you know, why are you doing this program? What's the need? It will be a very short answer, and then how they're going to deliver the program will be much longer. And I would say that you have to spend more time on what the need is, because, and how you know that that's the need. That's a critical piece of the question for us, because organizations can say this is the need in our community, but we want to hear about how you know that. Did you talk to people? Did you do a consultation? Did you, you know, whatever it might be. Oftentimes people skip over that part as to explaining how they know that's the need. And like, I could say the need in our office is such and such, but if I don't talk to the other people I work with in our office, it's my assumption. So that's a really, really important part of talking about demonstrating the need, is to tell us how you know it's the need. And then in terms of continuing to demonstrate the need, I would say, I know this sounds like a really simple question, but really using clear language. Lots of times organizations use lots of words but don't necessarily describe what they're really doing and why it's important. So I feel like you sound like a high school teacher to say, read your essay over before you submit it. But it really is true. When you're reading 100 applications, it's really hard to make sure that you, if it runs on, it's hard to get through it sometimes. So be succinct, be clear, read and reread, and know that it's a need. Demonstrate that it's a need.
Yeah. And if anyone has any question, please feel free to put in the chat box. If you had posted a question before, feel free to post a follow-up, a second question. While we're waiting,
Oh, okay. I was just going to say I could fill in a blank. One thing that I think Anu, I don't think mentioned at the beginning is that is the percentage of applications that are approved from the ones that we get. So it depends on the grant cycle, but oftentimes if we get 100 applications, we might be able to fund 10. So it's on average, it's about 10 to maybe 15% of the applications that we receive would actually get funded. And we get most of our applications from Ontario. So Ontario is a really competitive place to be. So if you don't get funded, it's not necessarily because it's not a great proposal. It's because we can't only fund in Ontario. We have to fund across the country.
That's very important. That's very, thank you for, really mention this and letting us know the details. Jessica has another question that says, are there instances where applications are submitted by two organizations working as partners to deliver one program? Are proposals considered more favorably when organizations demonstrate their community partnership?
Yes, so oftentimes the application that comes in is about a partnership, and we really like to see that because, for example, if it's a organization that serves is focusing on violence against women in the Ukrainian community, just throwing something out, and it's an organization that works with Ukrainian folks, but they have no experience in violence prevention work, then we would love to see a partnership, because each of them brings different expertise, one working with the Ukrainian community and one working in the violence sector, violence against women sector. So partnerships are fabulous, particularly when organizations bring differing areas of expertise to the table. That's really a positive thing, and it's always looked upon favorably. We also want people to demonstrate how they're going to work together, because sometimes two organizations coming together, it's not always easy to work in partnership, we recognize. So we would want to see that you figured out some of the mechanics of working together and how you're going to bring your two organizational values together to be able to deliver a program.
Yeah. We have one question from Priscilla. Echoing what's being said, there are two questions. Are there any calls for proposal planned for this year, 2019? And having a look at the website and the programs that the foundation currently fund, it seems like a common thread is initiatives at the community level. Would programs that are national in scope also be considered?
Okay. So question number one, which was about, are there any calls for proposals for 2019? We expect that there will be two calls for proposals this fall. The first one being for our Girls Fund, which is funding programs for girls 9 to 13, and that's all who identify as a girl. So it can be a trans girl as well included in that. Just wanted to make sure that's clear. It'll be posted on our website, the dates. We haven't determined the exact dates, but it will be in the fall for the Girls Fund, and that will be for 4 years of funding. The second one that will be posted in the fall is our Teen Healthy Relationships granting stream. So that's focusing on teens in the 11 to 19 range. Oftentimes it's part of school, connected to a school, but not always. Sometimes it's a community organization. And that's really looking at helping youth understand what's a healthy relationship, what's an unhealthy relationship, and not just in the dating or intimate partner relationship, but all types of relationships. And again, that'll be on the website because we haven't finalized the exact dates for that. And then the second part of the question was, would we fund programs that are national in scope? For example, an awareness campaign or a development resource material. So we do fund programs that are national. We would generally not fund awareness campaigns or resource development if it's just for the purpose of resource development. So, for example, if somebody said, we're just going to create a teen healthy relationship curriculum book or resources for teen on its own, we probably wouldn't fund that. But if it was a program that was actually working with youth, working with teens, and as part of it, they were going to develop some resources that could be shared, then we would probably consider it. So the resource development on its own wouldn't be enough. We would want it to be part of a program, and if you develop resources, that's great. We tend not to fund, again, strictly awareness campaigns unless it's part of something else that grounds it in. So for the Girls Fund, for example, we wouldn't usually, I wouldn't say never, but we wouldn't usually fund something around helping girls understand, feeling positive about being a girl. But if it was a girls program and that came out of it, then we would consider it. So hopefully that answers that question.
Does that answer your question, Priscilla? Well, feel free to follow up if you have any additional question or if there's any details that you want to really get into. Bridget has a question. Do individual specialist consultant, can they apply for grants?
Sorry, consultants apply? Sorry, I don't see the question, and so I'm just wondering.
I think she posted on a private thread.
Okay, so can you just repeat the question then?
Yes. Let me actually paste it to everyone. It is, can individual specialist consultant apply for grants?
No, the funding has to go to an organization that has a charitable number or a First Nation that's considered a qualified donee. So it has to be, we couldn't fund a consultant alone. Now, if the consultant was working with an organization on a particular program or developing something, they could be part of that program that the organization's working on, and they could be paid through that as long as it was part of the organization's plan.
Yeah. Does that answer your question, Bridget? Okay. So Jessica has another question. Thank you, Jessica. Are consultations with grant managers available prior to the proposal submission? So for questions or to ensure alignments, etc. Similarly, is feedback given to organizations whose proposals were rejected?
Yes, to both. So ahead of time, we always have a contact person that you can talk to about your grant, and we encourage you to do that, just to make sure that before you spend a lot of time on working on it, that you make sure that it does align, because we recognize that it's a lot of work to fill out funding proposals. So we would encourage that, recognizing that we get a lot of phone calls and have a lot of emails about it. So sometimes it's not as quick a response as you would like. So don't leave it to the last day before the application if you want to get a quick response. Often the managers that I work with who take the calls, they would easily be receiving about 20 emails or phone calls per day as it gets closer to the grants. So just keep that in mind. And then afterwards, we do send a letter out to everybody, even if you didn't get funded, with a very brief reason why. And if you want to know more information, then you can follow up with the person. There would be a contact person in the letter, and you can follow up to get more a better understanding of why it wasn't funded. And I do want to say also that sometimes it's not because it's not a good proposal, it's because there's not enough money to fund them all. So I know that's not always the answer people want to hear, but sometimes it's true.
Thank you, Beth. So Jessica, I hope that answers the question. And I think it's important to point out that if you read through our recent interview with Anu, she actually mentioned how when you are writing a proposal, when you're, sending out an application, it is part of an advocacy too. So if you find out that there are gaps that a foundation has not been funding so far, or, haven't been really invested in, sending a proposal or sending an application could be a way of reminding the committee in the foundation and their decision-making cycle of what are some things that might start to come up, might have to be paid more attention to. So maybe my question to Beth will be, what do you see are some new challenges or trends in the foundation or in the grant making sector in general?
Let's see. I would say that's a good question. I mean, I think in the grant making sector, or what's affecting all of us, both foundations as well as organizations on the ground, is the competitiveness for fundraised dollars. So we're competing as a foundation. We fundraise every year to be able to make grants. And so there's a lot of competition out there from big and small players. And I think then for smaller and medium-sized organizations, the fundraising, it's getting really, really competitive. So I think that's a challenge we're all facing. In terms of emerging trends, I think that what we're hearing from organizations that are putting in a proposal for a particular program, it's people are now talking more about the mental health issues related to it, which I think is a really positive thing. But the needs are getting oftentimes more complex. And so people are talking about trauma and how that affects mental health, how it affects the ability to deliver programs. Perhaps if you had a program and you used to be able to serve 20 people, now because it's more complex needs, you might only have 10 people in a particular group setting. So I think that's a trend that we're seeing a lot more of, and I welcome that people are talking about it more, but I think we have to figure out better how to address mental illness and mental health issues, in our programming, in our organizations. So I would say that's the big one.
Yeah, thank you so much. Does anyone have any last minute question before we close the floor? If you're typing, type something to let me know that you're still typing and you're just waiting to complete the sentence. All right, so I think I will need to thank Beth and of course Anu for this really fantastic webinar, and thank you everyone who signed up, who tuned in to the webinar, and all of you asked so amazing questions. I actually prepared so many extra questions just in case no one asked, but these are really, really valid and really important questions that I did not come up with, and I think it's great that this could be such an interactive platform. And just a little bit of a sneak peek of our next webinar, which will be next week, next Thursday. That will be with Ken Mormon. He's a faculty member and a really long-time friend for OCIC. He's faculty member at Humber College's Fundraising Management and International Development graduate programs. I think Kim might be joining us today. Ken, if you could just wave for a second. Yeah, but really, we want to just express our gratitude to Canadian Women's Foundation, to Beth, to Anu, to all the amazing staff members who helped us, really arrange this webinar today. And this webinar will be posted. It's recorded. It will be posted on our YouTube channel and then later posted on our website. I will add, so if there's anything on the Canadian Women's Foundation website that's been mentioned today, I will try to find a link, and of course I probably will confirm with you, Beth and Anu again before I post anything. But hi Ken. So those information will be in the description of the YouTube video. And thank you very much, everyone, and stay tuned for our next webinar. Thank you. Have a good day.